Welcome. We are joined today by Drew Gruber, Executive Director of Civil War Trails. Drew, it's great that we're together and talking about your organization.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
Before we go down the trail, why don't you tell us about yourself, where you grew up, your education, your family, and how you became associated with Civil War Trails.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in southern New Jersey, not too far from Monmouth Battlefield. I can't say that my mom and dad or sister were specifically my sort of introduction into history, but that would be my grandfather's fault, I guess you could say. His style of babysitting me included popping on one of those old Victory at Sea black and white VHS tapes, and that was sort of my first indoctrination into history, and that's sort of where I got interested in history, was my time with him. So fast forward several years, of course, growing up in New Jersey, which is a very quickly growing and developing state in the nation, I saw a lot of historic sites bulldozed, multiple places sort of paved over in the name of progress, and that inspired me to go to school in Fredericksburg, Virginia, for historic preservation. And of course, Fredericksburg itself, for those of the viewers who are watching, know that a lot of the battlefield there is also carved up by development. So it was a great place to study historic preservation. And then from there, I moved down to do my master's work in Richmond, and met a guy named Mitch Bowman, who was my predecessor, the previous executive director of Civil War Trails. And we sat down to lunch one day, and he got to talking about how he wanted to retire. And after a pretty intense interview process, here I am 5 years later. So
beautiful. So something you didn't mention is that you're a cat guy. Can you tell us more?
I like animals. I'm not just a cat guy, but I love all sorts of animals. I've grown up around animals most of my life. But yeah, so as I often say, Kate, my wife, and I live here in Williamsburg, Virginia, with our two cats, who often show up in various Zoom and live videos. So you may see one of them still.
Right. So what is the mission of Civil War Trails?
That's an easy one. The mission of Civil War Trails is to encourage people to stand in the footsteps of history. That's what we're after. So our whole goal is to tell really exciting, accessible stories to people who can get them to go to these places and actually stand in the footsteps where those events happened. It's an incredibly fun job, and it's extremely rewarding. We get to stand next to descendants of formerly enslaved African Americans, as well as Union and Confederate generals, while we work on these signs. And to be able to take these stories from small communities, to be able to take these stories literally out of the attics of historical societies, and then give them a life as a sign, put them on the ground, and then get people to those, it's incredibly rewarding, and it's a lot of fun. So the whole goal of Civil War Trails is to get people to stand in the footsteps of history, whether that be driving the Gettysburg campaign route turn by turn as you follow the entire thing, or taking a hike in East Tennessee or Western North Carolina up to a Confederate gun battery. There's always an adventure when you're on the trail.
All right. So I suppose that the Trails is a registered nonprofit?
We are a 501c3 registered in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but Virginia, of course, is only one of 6 states in which we operate. And
you have a board of directors.
We do. It's an ever-growing board of directors. I have multiple bosses, and they're great to work for. They are oftentimes very hands-off, but they're also always there to lend an ear. So, to your point before about who we are and what we do, when we want people to sort of stand in these footsteps of history, that means that when they go visit these places, they're going to fuel up the car. They're probably going to stay overnight. They'll likely buy a souvenir or at least eat while they're there. And that generates tourism. Those are big tourism dollars. So the board that I report to, my executive committee, and the rest of the board members are typically made up of tourism directors. So I have 5 on my executive team and many, many other board members underneath there, and they represent either each state travel office that we work with or each of the individual travel regions. So for your listeners who know us through education, that may be our product, but our overall goal is actually to drive economic development.
Beautiful. So You have a board of advisors, and if you do, how do they operate?
So we don't have a board of advisors per se. What we have, our board is sort of split into directors and the executive committee. So the executive committee works with me on, what nonprofits do. So keeping up with our bylaws, checking our finances, all the fun legalese that goes behind a nonprofit. And then our board of directors are really those sort of tourism or history people in each region. So for example, in the Shenandoah Valley, my current director is Terry Hedder, who's also the educational director for the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation. So Terry's great to work with because he knows what's happening in the entirety of the valley, not just today, but also in 1863 or 1864. So that's an example of how I work with each one of my board members. It's really rewarding.
I have not seen any Civil War trail signs in Washington State. So where do you operate?
Great question. I'd love to be on the West Coast. It would give me an excuse to travel more. So we have about 1,200 sites across 5 partnering states right now, and that includes Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, and Tennessee. So if you drew an X right through the middle of our program, it would take you from Wheeling, West Virginia, down to Wilmington, North Carolina, or the eastern shore of Maryland, all the way out to Memphis, Tennessee. And we've just recently started growing into Pennsylvania. So we have a lot of ground to cover, and there's a small staff who gets to cover it. So as I often say, while I'm the executive director, I wear a lot of bib overalls, and I sure do a lot of work, a lot of manual labor. So it's been fun. I'd love to be able to continue to grow and expand further down south and out west. Personally, I love reading about the campaigns in Kentucky, and it would be a good place to retire. So I'd like to add that to the list of places to put under the trails umbrella. We also do a lot of non-Civil War things too. So we're helping some places right now tell the civil rights stories that they have in their communities, and we're also helping other communities prepare for the big USA 250 anniversary of the Revolution.
All right. So tell us about your latest projects.
I think we have, I can kind of see it sitting on my desk now. We have about 80 pending projects underway right now. It's a lot. We've never been busier. In fact, when I've gone back and looked at our status sheets before the Sesquicentennial and after, we have more projects now than we did before the Sesquicentennial kicked off, which is amazing. We have multiple new signs under development right now. We've been working with some historians in Pennsylvania to figure out, where's that low-hanging fruit in and around the Gettysburg campaign. We have a new sign we're working on right now in Mineral County, West Virginia. A lot of people tend not to think about the mountains of West Virginia as sort of an epicenter for the war, but of course it was. Mineral County, West Virginia, a bit in Pennsylvania. We have an incredibly cool site coming up in Western Tennessee about a gentleman who was with the United States Colored Troops. So we have a lot of new signs under development right now, which is exciting. And perhaps the coolest thing that we get to do that takes up the majority of that list I see over there is refreshing our old signs. So a lot of your viewers and listeners probably will recognize Civil War trail signs. A lot of the people who are tuning in are also super uber Civil War nerds. And a lot of those nerds like to write us with new diary entries, photographs, research that they've done. And they'll say something like, hey, we were at your sign on the Knoxville campaign, and did you know that this happened? And they'll send it to us. And that'll allow us to continually update and refresh our signs to add the latest interpretation, the newest research, artifacts that surface that have to do with that specific event. So the thing that keeps us the most busy is probably the refresh of these old signs. And we specifically build our signs so we can continually evolve them. Because of course, as you know, the study of this era is constantly evolving and changing as we uncover new evidence. So yeah, we got a lot going on. Lots of new signs, lots of old signs being revised. It keeps us busy.
Excellent. So I imagine that people engage in the trails when they're planning a history tour. But what's the best way to tap into your resources?
Yeah, great question. So we actually hear from a lot of roundtables, whether they be administrators of roundtables around the nation or just roundtable members who are going out with either their group as a whole or just a few of them. And they'll typically write us and they'll say, hey, send us your Tennessee Civil War Trails brochure, circle 2 or 3 things that you think we can't miss. And then they'll often go on to ask me or the rest of our team, what are some other museums to check out? Are there any live festivals, music? Our team specifically recommends local beer, bourbon, barbecue, everything in between. So we are kind of a one-stop shop when it comes to planning your next Civil War road trip. But it's not just history people who reach out to us. We have a lot of folks who are sort of adjacent to history, folks who are traveling for other things, and they know that when they follow a historic route, like the Antietam Campaign Trail or Lee's Retreat, that they're going to find exactly what they're after. So whether they be, people hiking the Appalachian Trail who are going to look for new places to hike along the AT, again, not to bring this back up, but we get a lot of people who are into microbrews or local wine who write us, and they'll ask us for our maps to follow these, historic routes. And we get a ton of young folks, my age and younger, who specifically write us, and they want to follow these historic routes as a way to see super local experiences, whether they be bed and breakfasts or places to go kayak or live music or art, small towns. I mean, that's what people are into right now. And it's really cool to see folks turn to Civil War trails, not just to plan a history trip, but as part of their sort of larger itinerary.
So I know that the trails is a fair amount of marketing. Tell us about some of the successes in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple years ago, we partnered with Preservation Maryland on an event called Paddle the Battle. And the goal was to raffle off a few kayaks to go down the Antietam Creek the day of the battle, and you'd stop at each one of the fords along the creek, and you'd hear a little bit of history from the ranger, you'd eat some local food. I think there was some wine involved, and as I recall it correctly, there was only one person who bought tickets that sort of confirmed they were a history nerd, and that was me. Everybody else who was excited to go visit that battlefield by way of kayak or canoe wasn't really a self-proclaimed history person. Civil War Trails, we do some advertising on our own, but a lot of our partners, the folks who help us sort of carry that fiscal burden, they do a lot of advertising as well. And of course, those tourism offices are going to look at Civil War Trails as part of this sort of larger tourism network. So they'll market us as, alongside local food or local music, or even places like wineries, so in and around the Maryland, Western Maryland area, we oftentimes get marketed with some of the rural wineries. So it's always interesting to see how our partners choose to pair history, whether it be a pairing with wine or a pairing with food or a pairing with beer or a hike. I'm always surprised when I see an advertisement show up for what you can do along the Civil War Trail.
Paddle the Battle. That's really cool. So yeah. I know that you market to Europeans. What channels do you use for them?
Yeah, so a lot of our state travel offices like Visit NC or the Virginia Tourism Corporation, they have offices that are specifically charged with trying to draw in foreign travel. And of course, we don't see a lot of that right now at the moment, but over the last couple years, there have been offices in Toronto, London, Frankfurt, and even out in Taiwan, China, and Japan, who have requested boxes of Civil War Trails maps to go out to their version of AAA centers. And a lot of folks from around the world are interested and engaged by our Civil War, which is fascinating to me when you consider, how much longer the English Civil War was, or the depth or age of history that, places like Italy have, that someone would want to come here and experience what took place for a brief 4-year window. But yeah, we have a lot of folks, Germans, French, of course, English, fascinated by our Civil War. We get a lot of Canadians asking us for information. They do like to come down in RVs and trip up and down, Interstate 95 or through the mountains of West Virginia. So yeah, we constantly see interaction from what's often called foreign travel. So it's exciting, and at the same time, it's also interesting to see specifically what they're interested in when it comes to Civil War history. A lot of Germans really like the minutia of arms and equipment. And we have a lot of folks specifically from Japan and China who are fascinated by this kind of juxtaposition of history and in the mountain regions. So they're always asking about places where they can go in the mountains and see these historic sites.
All right. So I suppose that you could discuss market analysis until the cows come home. What do you learn from that analysis?
Well, there's a few things that I think are super important to relay. First off, when we look at history travel over the last decade, it continues to be extremely profitable, and we continue to see more and more people coming to these sites. So, despite what you may have heard in places like the Wall Street Journal last year or some other blogs, history travel, at least until COVID and the pandemic hit, history travel has been increasingly popular. In fact, it's fascinating. If you're a nerd like me and you're interested in why people go places and how long they stay, during that period of the sesquicentennial, we see a rise in the number of people who travel to these sites. And that rise is equitable to the amount of money that tourism offices put into it. But then if you look at what happens after 2015, historic sites continue to outpace travel than many other categories. In North Carolina, for example, history travel to historic sites and museums beat beer. We beat beer travel. And that's saying something. Now, we didn't necessarily beat the beach or golf, let's be real, but we beat beer travel. So that was huge for us. We know that people are increasingly interested in historic sites, and they're increasingly interested in museums. And I know this sounds counterintuitive to a lot of folks who may be thinking, oh, but there's so many issues with history and memory right now. We know that history travel continues to be exciting and important to folks, specifically when that history that's being relayed is very personal. It's evocative. It has a context that people find relative to them or relative to our world. So whether that be people traveling to historic sites because they're looking for answers about things they find in the news, or whether that be because historic sites are, how do I want to say this, like hyper local. They're hip. It's posh to go to somewhere that is so local, a place that is an amenity you're not going to be able to consume anywhere else. I think is another reason why we see history travel up. The other thing that is a huge potential reason we see history travel up is simply because there were a lot of folks trapped in cars with their dads and uncles and grandfathers during the sesquicentennial who had no choice in the matter. And they, now that those people are, settled in their work or have families, they're starting to remember that as they sort of drove the route of the Nashville campaign with their uncle and their dad during the sesquicentennial, that they found, cool things like live music and beer and antiques and everything that's exciting to visit today. So there may be a number of reasons why history travel is up. There's some other really exciting metrics about history travel. We know that the biggest age bracket right now for history travel, the biggest increase, has been in the audience between 25 and 34, which is fascinating to me. The National Trust did a survey about a year or two ago, and they surveyed millennials about their attitude on history. And one of the questions that's always stuck with me, and I'll never forget this, is that 71% of millennials said that they would prefer to visit a historic site when they travel, which is incredible. And if you dig into that further, it goes back to this idea of what's really local. They would prefer to go to a historic downtown versus shopping in a strip mall. They would prefer to stay at a local bed and breakfast versus staying in a chain hotel. And that same idea is relative to Civil War trails. You can't get the story about the Battle of McDowell unless you go to McDowell, Virginia, and hike that hill. And to young travelers, that's exciting. It's the same reason they go to special exhibitions at museums. So we're seeing a lot of younger folks. We're seeing a lot of continued interest in historic sites, and it's not just from people who travel for history. We also see a lot of other what's called travel profiles turn to historic sites to really flesh out their family vacation. Needless to say, as you could probably read, it's a very exciting time to be part of this program.
So the McDowell Hill, come on, I've hiked that. That's much more than a hill.
Oh yeah, I always butcher the name of it. Was it Sitlington's Hill? And that sucker's a mountain. That's no hill. That's a straight up mountain. Yeah.
It is. And I can tell you about running into three bear cubs on that, on my hike back down to the car, and how I finally realized, oh my God, there's a mama bear around here. I got to get out.
You know, there's a really good example for you. So Highland County, Virginia, we probably see, I'd say over the course of a year, 100 or so people who specifically ask us about the Battle of McDowell. But in Highland County, there's the Maple Festival, which is massive in Western Virginia. It's a super popular event. And that's the weekend where we see the most amount of people checking in or, you know, tweeting or taking Instagram photos from the top of that hill is on that weekend, because they specifically market that as something you can do if the line at the festival gets too long. So going back to your idea about how we market these sites, there's a really good example for you.
So, and then you can always go to Jefferson Pools.
Oh.
So who are your biggest group of constituents?
I would say that our biggest, I would say that if I had to put a fine point on it, our visitor is probably split right dead smack down the middle between sort of the, and no offense here, sort of the older, whiter Civil War roundtable crowd and the younger sort of, not accidental traveler, but the traveler who sort of will either stop at one of our sites along the way, or a traveler who is on their way to do something else. So it's kind of split between the middle, I think, at this point. Of course, I'm not standing out there with a pen and paper at every sign asking, where are you from? What's your household gross income? Tell me how you feel about this. What other activities are you doing? What's your zip code? We're not doing any of that. So the research that we get all comes from either firsthand from the people who work in visitor centers, or from some internet sleuthing that we do, or from, you know, some survey work that's done by other travel and tourism offices. But I would say that our audience is probably half and half that sort of traditional heritage tourist, if you would, and then half that sort of younger, I don't want to say accidental tourist, but occasional tourist, the folks who are looking to us for other things, not just a Civil War road trip.
All right. So many organizations have been affected and negatively by the COVID-19 pandemic. Has the trails been impacted at all?
We have. First off, I'll start by saying that this is a pretty scary time for our partners. Our partners, you know, range from these small tourism offices to chambers of commerce to museums, and certainly they are feeling the crunch of this. But reciprocally, we are, as we often say, an open air museum. And almost immediately after travel restrictions were announced in the states that we operate, we became slammed with questions from people. You know, where can I go and get outside safely? Is there anywhere secret that you would, you know, recommend we go take a hike? I got that a couple times. We had folks asking, hey, you know, we're in between trips right now trying to get home. Can you recommend a place to stay? So those were sort of half the questions we started off this pandemic with, and then they morphed. We had moms and dads who all of a sudden had been thrust into being homeschool teachers writing us, oh my God, my kids are driving me crazy. I need a lesson. Can I get them in the car and take them to the nearest Civil War trail sign? Where is it? Send me a map. So we got a lot of requests like that. And then in the last 3 or 4 weeks, it's just starting to trail off now as we talk here in early June. But in the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've had a lot of people, Canadians, Midwesterners, folks from New England, who are taking advantage of these very low gas prices, and they are fueling up their RVs and they are getting pumped to travel. So the requests are coming in for brochures. They're asking us for itinerary suggestions. I, of course, work in a space where I have the maps here with me. So my poor mailman, I've been handing him over just stacks of maps that are going out to people from around the world the last couple of days. So as odd as it is for me to say, we have been busy during COVID, and it's been nice to have people reminded that we are a resource for them. And at the same time, it's been hard to to hear our partners struggling with the lean financial times that will come with the lack of travel and tourism. And a lot of that is, when people take a day trip to go visit a trail sign, or they pick up curbside service, that goes far for the communities, but it doesn't go as far as them taking a multi-day trip, staying in multiple hotel rooms. And of course, all those things add up. So it's been a mixed bag for us. But I can't tell you how humbled I've been and how pleased I've been to still be able to serve, visitors in each one of these communities throughout COVID, and do it in a safe and responsible way.
So many of the people who are watching this are members of a Civil War roundtable. How can Civil War roundtables become more involved in Civil War trails?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, huge too. So there's a couple ways. First and foremost, if you and your roundtable are itching to get out of the house and take a road trip, lean on us. We can help find you guys group rates and group accommodations. Really easy to do right now. But even as travel restrictions lift, we can definitely help you find group rates. We can set you up with tour guides. We can present itineraries for you that won't take your travel bus down dirt roads. We know these areas really well. So lean on us to help you and your roundtable plan trips. The same would be true if you're just taking a romantic vacation with your partner and you want to hit a history site or two along the way. We can help you sort of craft that itinerary as well. If you have any great researchers in your roundtable, tell them to contact us if they got great information. Perhaps the easiest way for roundtables to get involved with us is if you're traveling and you see a Civil War trail sign and it was either difficult to find or if it was in bad shape, let us know. There are only 2 full-time staff for this entire program, so as many eyes and ears as we can get in the ground, the better. And then, of course, it comes down to the issue of finances. So a lot of our partners are like us, going to experience some lean financial times. It's already begun, and I expect it to continue for the next couple of years. So if you as an individual roundtable member, or you as a roundtable would like to adopt a Civil War trail sign, we have a handful of them that could use the added sponsorship for a year or two. So each Civil War trail sign does require an annual sponsor. And that sponsor allows me to gas up the truck, to paint the signs, to update the signs, to do all of the DOT signage to get you to that site, and as well as produce the brochures and market these sites to travelers. So if you want to get involved, there are a variety of different ways. And I know you're going to post my contact information later for folks who want to reach out. So you can support trails in a number of ways, being it everything from writing a check to helping us research.
So the sponsorship of an existing sign is like $200 a year?
Yeah, so each Civil War trail sign has this annual sponsor. It's $200 a year to sponsor a trail sign. And that's what allows us to do sort of all those perks that I just described before, really to maintain and market that site. So if you think about it, over 1,200 sites across 6 states, now you kind of have an idea of what my annual operating budget is. And that's what we kind of want to maintain is that level of financial support. And that's just to maintain what we have now. That's not even to grow. We've had a couple roundtables who have sponsored new sites in their regions, which is extremely exciting. But my goal right now is to just make sure that we can see ourselves and our communities through the fallout from the pandemic. And certainly we would love the help of roundtables to sponsor a sign. Of course, if they can't levy the money to sponsor a Civil War trail sign, we're always happy to accept donations of whatever size. And of course, as a 501c3, it is tax deductible.
So I understand Civil War roundtables sponsoring a sign. Can individuals do that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a few individuals over a couple years reach out to sponsor signs. Some of them have sponsored signs about their descendants, which was really cool. We've had other people just write us a check and say, use it where you need to. And of course, all that's tax deductible as well. So if a roundtable wanted to sponsor one sign, we would absolutely love it. And we would hope to be able to match you up with a sign that's germane to your roundtable. But if an individual wanted to sponsor a sign or just make a donation, it is tax deductible. And of course, you'll get a receipt for that as well. But yeah, we are normally sponsored and well funded through these local tourism offices, which means we've rarely had to do development drives in the past. But These are not normal times, so I'm looking forward with the help of some roundtables to see us through the lean couple years that's ahead of us.
So aside from the warm, fuzzy feeling that one receives from being a Civil War Trail sponsor, do sponsors get any other benefits, like perhaps that hat behind you?
So this one here is the last one I have. And I always put it up there to sort of dangle it in front of people as a little carrot. So we used to, for many years, put the name of the sponsor on the sign, but we got away from that because each year is an annual elective. So we may have someone who chooses to sponsor a sign for 1 year. We may have an organization like the Bull Run Civil War Roundtable who will choose to sponsor for several years in a row. But the risk that we run with putting a name on the sign is, of course, if that organization were to fold or not be able to sponsor, it actually costs us more money to correct the name than it would be for that $200 to see us through longer. So we don't recognize the sponsors on those signs for exactly that reason. And a lot of folks are okay with that. They seem to understand. And it would be my hope, it certainly was my hope with the budget that we had proposed before everything broke out to get some more swag like this, but we've not found it in our budget to give out hats or anything like that yet. But I'm confident we'll get there.
All right, Drew. So do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Absolutely. So just remember that Civil War Trails is a program that's supposed to work for you. We often say that Civil War Trails is from the grassroots up. So as you travel the Trails program, remember to rely on us if you need us to help you, plan your trip. But we're also going to rely on you. It's a living and breathing program. So as I said before, get engaged. If you are researching a topic that has to do with the trail sign, reach out to us. We can share media from our sign, or if you have information about how we can improve our sign, let us know. But we're just thankful to have as many roundtable partners as we do, and we're looking forward to growing our relationship with each one of them.
All right. Well, hey, thank you for being such a good sport. And folks, get out there and support Civil War Trails.
Thank you.